Hello YouTube, welcome back to L-Space, or welcome to L-Space if you're new. My name is Tristan, and today I am bringing you an original tag video. This one is one that I have created. It's one I've kind of been thinking about for a little while. I've really enjoyed doing tag videos. I think they're a fun way to not only connect with kind of yourself and your bookshelves and your TBR, but also a nice way to connect with other booktubers. And so I wanted to give it a try and create one for myself. And then obviously bring that out into the YouTube sphere, etc. So I'm calling this the roadmap of your life tag. And it's pretty simple, more or less. I think it can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. It has a single prompt, and that single prompt can be expanded into really as much detail as you want to do. So it has a single prompt, and that's it. And the prompt is a book that either takes place in or reminds you of every place you've lived. And that can mean anything from country, state, city, town, apartment, or house. So if you're someone who hasn't moved around a lot, as far as like cities and states go, talk about the houses that you've lived in, the apartments you've lived in. Maybe if you've never left your parents' house, did you ever change rooms? Or are there certain things in your house that certain books remind you of, or anything like that? So basically, like, you're just mapping out your life experience, whether that is geographically or internally. Seems pretty simple. So, I've lived in several different cities and states. I'm primarily from the West Coast. There's Wally. And I've lived pretty much all over the West Coast. I was born in Idaho. I spent my childhood in California. I spent my high school and college years in Idaho, and then I kind of became an adult in Seattle, Washington. I just tell people that I just need to die in Oregon, and then I've made the circuit. So, yeah, I'm very much from the West. But I currently live in Massachusetts. Currently live in Boston, and so we're going to go through each of the books that reminds me of each of these places. And Wally is going to cause trouble. Get down, thank you. I was 2 months old when I moved from Idaho to California, and I don't remember the first time I lived in Idaho, but I still kind of, I guess, categorize that as where I spent a lot of like my youth, my young adult years, I guess. I think the correct word that I'm looking for is adolescence. I spent my adolescence there, and I remember a lot of that quite well. So technically, I've lived in Idaho twice, both in the same town. I lived in Moscow, Idaho. That's the town I was born in. It's where I went to high school and college. I am going to, for just, I think, simplicity's sake, I'm gonna call that like the first place that I've lived, even though it's technically like the first and the third, if you talk about like the way that I've jumped around. So I'm going to pick The Hobbit for the book that reminds me most of my time spent in Idaho. And the reason being is basically like the Shire. I lived in an area that is rolling hills, wheat fields, all of that. So fun fact, the first time I ever had an Idaho potato was in Montana. Up until that point, I had only ever had Washington potatoes. So it's a very, like, when you see images of especially Peter Jackson's rendition of the Shire, it's very reminiscent of the town that I spent my adolescence. And the other thing is, Idaho is kind of like the deep south of the Northwest as far as America goes. And so it's sort of it's like the weird conservative conspiracy theory capital of that area. And so the reason why I'm choosing The Hobbit is because A, the Shire very much reminds me of Moscow, Idaho, and then also the hobbits are fairly disconnected from the reality of the rest of their world. It's also quite representative of a lot of people in Idaho. They are very disconnected from the real world around them. Um, but also, I read this for the first time in high school. I think it really sparked my love of fantasy, my sort of adult interest in fantasy. Also, my interest in Tolkien. I did like one of my final English papers in my senior year on The Hobbit and Tolkien in general. And also, like, I would do frequent Lord of the Rings marathons, the 12-hour extended edition things. So just like Lord of the Rings is very, I have strong associations with Lord of the Rings and my time spent in Idaho, and so I'm choosing The Hobbit to represent that for myself. Next, I'm moving to California. Like I said, this is technically like the middle part between my two stints in Idaho. Um, and I'm going to choose Just by Looking at Him by Ryan O'Connell, mostly because this takes place in California. Now, this takes place in LA. I have never lived in LA. I've actually only been to the LA airport. I lived in a place called Fresno. It's more of a, well, I didn't live in Fresno. I lived like outside of Fresno, but I lived in just like a small little agricultural town. My dad is like a big invasive species plant biologist guy. And so I've lived throughout my childhood. We've lived in agricultural towns. If you know the show Special on Netflix, it stars Ryan O'Connell. It was written and created by him as well. It's about a gay man with cerebral palsy kind of navigating self-love and self-acceptance in a world that is pretty inhospitable for somebody who is disabled, especially in the gay community, which is, you know, toxic in a lot of ways.
Hi, editing Tristan here to talk a little bit more about Just by Looking at Him by Ryan O'Connell. So I made the connection in my head, but I did not say it out loud, that if you've seen Special on Netflix, it's very similar to the book in that they follow a lot of the same themes that you find in the show Special, but it expands a lot more on the ideas again of self-love, self-worth, all of those things. So it is still about a man with cerebral palsy. It is still about somebody working and living in LA, and yeah, I just forgot to make that specific connection that made what I was talking about, you know, relevant. So yeah, that's where we got there. Okay, cool. Back to the rest of the video.
I'm choosing this because it was very atmospheric and it reminded me a lot of my time spent in California, even though I've never been to LA or spent really any time in LA. It reminded me a lot of the atmosphere, the temperature, the climate in general, and it felt very much like living in California again. So I chose this one for my time spent in California, and also just like look at how beautiful that cover is. This is one of those ones that I fully picked up solely because of the cover, and turned out to actually be one of my favorite books. So turns out you can judge a book by its cover. All right, so next, after I graduated from my degree from the University of Idaho, I got the heck out, and I moved to Seattle. And I'm going to do two books for Seattle. The first one is going to be the Tales of the City series, and I don't have my copy of the first one in that one, and so I'm just going to put the sort of like all of them up here because the covers are really quite striking and quite beautiful. And that book is about it's a fascinating series, and I'd love to talk about it more in another context. But basically, it's about a woman named Marianne who comes from Cleveland, Ohio, moves to San Francisco, and kind of falls into this really cool found family sort of like quirky, queer, bohemian found family in San Francisco. And while it takes place in San Francisco, it was very reminiscent of my first years in Seattle, where I came from, kind of a backwoods, backwater town, and moved to the big city and fell in with a really lovely community of queer, artsy people that I adore and miss dearly. There's also the Netflix limited series that came out in 2019, which stars Laura Linney and Olympia Dukakis. It's just a phenomenal show. Like I think it's perfect in a lot of ways. And Elliot Page, pre-transition, but fascinating show, and makes me cry. And it's very reminiscent of just my sort of experience becoming a queer adult in Seattle, and I adore Tales of the City by Armistead Maupin. I've got a few of them up here, but I don't have the first three. But anyway, so yeah, I'm choosing that one as kind of like my coming to Seattle, and then the other one that I'm going to talk about is Jay's Gay Agenda by Jason June. And this one is this is just a really fun YA rom-com. It's a really beautiful queer love story. It's kind of a similar thing where Jay comes from a rural conservative town and moves to Seattle and kind of experiences gay life as for the first time. Kind of he can be authentically himself in Seattle, and this book has a lot of strong memories for me from Seattle because I read this kind of in one of the best summers of my life. There's a lot of scenes in here that are directly in Seattle, like Cal Anderson Park. I read the scene in this book that takes place in Cal Anderson Park while sitting in Cal Anderson Park, and it was just such a wonderful experience to live the events kind of the book. And the other thing that I like about this one is that it is very sex positive, and I think that with YA books, that's quite important to just recognize that sexuality is a pretty regular, normal, mundane phenomenon. Kids have sex. It's fine. Just as long as they're being safe and responsible about it. And this book is it's not shaming kids. It's just like a very open and positive representation of that. I think it's also a story of kind of what I wish my high school experience was. I think any and every gay person who has lived in the closet and come out later in life wishes that they had come out earlier. And this kind of is a pretty good representation of what I kind of wish that my high school experience had been, but it's still just a lovely story, and it's fun. It's funny. And I think that Jason June is a very talented author. They've got a couple other books that I need to get to, but this is definitely reminiscent of Seattle for me. All right. So, as I mentioned, I currently live in Boston, Massachusetts, and I had to choose The Soul of an Octopus because this takes place largely in the New England Aquarium, which is like 6 miles from where I live. And I read this for the first time in Massachusetts. I read this after reading Remarkably Bright Creatures, which takes place like outside of Seattle, which is kind of fun. But that book was largely inspired by a lot of things in this book. So the octopus has always been one of my favorite animals. I am a huge Ursula fan, as I think any gay is. She is kind of the queen of of the Disney villains for us gays. And I've always been fascinated by octopus in general. So when I lived in California, we lived really close to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, which is like the best aquarium in the world. It's one of the premier like research aquariums, and it's just like a fantastic institution just in general. But I always went to see the octopus and the giant Pacific octopus that they had there. And the New England Aquarium has a couple octopus as well. And this book follows Sai's, it's nonfiction, it follows Sai's relationship and study of four different octopus throughout their lives, and learning about the way that octopus view the world, their sense of consciousness, their intelligence, and all of that. It's a fascinating book, just in general. Like, I think philosophically, it's a very fascinating book, and it's a very engaging read as well. It connected a lot of things for me. I think that because it also talks about the octopuses in the Seattle Aquarium, which is fun. So it kind of brought together really everything about me, my interest in octopus, and then like a lot of places that I've lived, and then the fact that it takes place largely in the New England Aquarium is very fitting. So I chose The Soul of an Octopus for that one. And yeah, would highly recommend this one. So I said that this is the roadmap of your life, and anybody who's ever taken a road trip knows that a roadmap not only shows where you've been, but where you're going. And so I guess this is technically the sort of, I guess this you could say is the second prompt to the tag, but it is more or less part of the first one. And this is a book you associate with somewhere you want to live, or what will be your next destination. And for me, I am choosing A Hatful of Sky by Terry Pratchett. I discovered Terry Pratchett while I was living in Seattle, and I very desperately want to move back to Seattle because I love Seattle so much. I don't like Massachusetts very much. Seattle has always just been like tugging me back to it, and I can't seem to escape the desire to return to Seattle. It is my home. I think just unequivocally, it is where I will die. I adore Seattle, the city, the state, the people, everything about it. I love it. And like I said, I discovered Terry Pratchett in Seattle. I was introduced to him by my lovely queer found family there. And this book is very much about finding community, and then also it's the second book in the Tiffany Aching series, and it's about, there's a thing called the Hiver. It's this mysterious mental creature that exists in the minds of creatures, and it is all about Tiffany figuring out how to get rid of it. I think the fact that I discovered Terry Pratchett in Seattle is very fitting for this one because I would like to return there, but more specifically, there's a quote in this book that I think really sums up where I want to go and where I am going, and I will read it for you. And so the quote is, like I said, at the very end of the book, she goes away to study witching. I mean, some of the book is like, you can't study to become a witch, which is fun. But she eventually returns home, and as the book is wrapping up, this quote jumps at you and really sums up how I feel about moving back to Seattle. And it says, "Why do you go away? So that you can come back, so that you can see the place you came from with new eyes and extra colors. And the people there see you differently too. Coming back to where you started is not the same as never leaving." I think that very much represents where I want to go. I am very excited to return to where I came from, to see it with my new eyes and extra colors, and to see what Seattle will have in store for me when I inevitably get there. There may be a PhD stop in the way, but you know, that'll come or it won't. But yeah, so that is the roadmap of my life book tag. I will be tagging people down in the description. I have quite a few channels in mind that I am going to be tagging, and I'm very interested to hear what they think about this tag, or like what their responses are going to be, because I've been watching their channels for quite a while now, and I think that their life experiences are going to be very interesting when wrapped up in books. So for now, that is all I have for you. Thank you very much for watching. Give me a like and a subscribe if you're new, and if you liked the tag video. If you, of course, have a YouTube channel and you would like to do the tag, by all means, do it. Consider yourself tagged. And I will make sure to tag me in when you do the response so that I can watch and see what you've picked for each of the places that you've lived. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time. Bye-bye.